By the way, I first, you raised really some, I thought, great points after you watched me struggle trying to express my headset about languaging. So I thought we should get together here and maybe talk more, talk more about that. And
Yeah.
not only that, but you raised some really interesting uh, terms that I'm not sure most people think about, such as digital infinity and the whole idea that we have a lot of stuff in our head, but only one mouth, which is a challenge. So just do you, I want to say a few things about that stuff, but I'm wondering if you want to say some more stuff about, you have more to say about that um, by way of introduction here. And we really, to everybody watching us, A, thank you, but B, we're really having here to have a conversation and raise issues that we really think should be front and center in our field of speech and language, but typically are not dealt with. And part of perhaps the reason they're not dealt with is relates to our struggle right here in trying to get across some ideas that are quite complex about two behavioral systems that are very complex: speech, language, and a third one in the background that it's part of all this cognition, ideation, awareness, and emotion, by the way, that too. That's often suppressed in our field problematically. So, Kimberly, do you have anything to say before I say anything else? If I say whatever it is I need to say in any way that anybody could follow. But you were saying you have anything to say, and I'm getting my caffeine fix here.
No, I was just going to say, I learned that from your class. That was the first time I ever heard digital infinity, those two words together. And I had to really think about what it meant. And once I felt like I understood what you were trying to teach us, it just kind of stayed with me. And I remember you said that you would get a t-shirt and have that put on a t-shirt, digital
Yeah, I
infinity.
did that actually.
Oh, did you?
That was a while ago. Yeah, I had somebody do digital infinity, although these days I think in terms of quantum infinity, but so be it. But I got that from Chomsky, by the way. Noam Chomsky, that's not my original idea at all, but it's about how language, well, it's about all kinds of things. One of which is just what are happening right now, that we have this in the book. I put down the term the superpower of languaging, which is, I mean, it's a friggin' superpower, and we all have it. And I just want to emphasize, we all have it, not just professors, not just adults, not just quote unquote typically achieving individuals. Everybody, if has the ability to keep coming up with ideas about and then code express them one way or another on an ongoing basis. Again, everyone has streams of consciousness occurring. Now, in our field, who talks about streams of consciousness? Not many people. But if you're dealing with anybody in terms of and trying to understand and facilitate language, that we have this ability to really generate an infinite number of ideas related to experiences we may be having in life or our imagination or discoveries we're making. You just keep having the ability, you just keep having ideas and feelings. And then you have one way or another, you're bound to do one of two things. One of which is think to yourself, and we have to presume that everybody we're interacting with is thinking to themselves. They have an internal conversation going on. It's clipped. It doesn't have to be full sentences. It doesn't even have to be verbal. As I said, I think we said the list of things I mentioned, people come up with any way to express what's on their minds. And if people are having trouble doing it orally, they're going to do it one way or another, you know, through, again, art, music, through tantruming, through whatever it's necessary to express, if the choice is to express it to other folks. And without a doubt, they're expressing it to themselves.
I I agree. I agree. When I first heard it, I was kind of astounded because it reminded me of what I was doing when I was trying to get help from my son, and I was being told, well, he's doing something and that's elopement, or he's doing something and he's trying to avoid. And I would sit there and go over what's happening in my mind when I'm watching him go through these things, or I'm watching him being asked to do these things. And in my mind, all of these things that I'm not saying at all, I'm just thinking like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, or that would frustrate me, or I wouldn't want to do that, or, I need to shift my weight because my foot's falling asleep. I'm thinking all these different things. But someone who's looking at me might just think, well, avoidance. She doesn't want to participate. And I started to realize, well, how can I possibly know that these same things and many more things aren't going on in my son's head just because he is not using motor speech? And so that's where I kind of came to that. I didn't know a name for it until I was in your class. And then that's when I kind of related the two together, that all of these things that are kind of running through my head and the things I was trying to convince other people and therapists around at that time, I thought were going on in my son's head, and he just didn't have a way to let us know. I finally realized that that's what I was trying to express to them, was there's some type of digital infinity, something else that's going on other than him just sitting there, a blank slate, nothing going on in his head until you present him with something and say, point to the blue truck. I just didn't believe that because that's not how my brain was working. And so I didn't want to say that my son's brain couldn't do the same, even though he couldn't express it.
And we would love, really, I think the field has to capture the reality. The challenge we, I think, want to make to the field is, are we willing to struggle with the reality of it? You know? And then that's what you were, Kimberly, when you really captured, I thought you were, that it's such a challenge. Like when I'm thinking to myself, it makes sense. A lot of stuff makes sense. But when I have to express it through my mouth, one mouth, uh, it becomes a real challenge. It really puts a lot of information processing stress on the system, so to speak.
I think that it got to the point for me where I just couldn't see in my own mind and in my own life anytime when I'm just sitting and there's nothing going through my mind. And so I felt like it took more of a leap of faith for me to believe that my son was sitting there and there was nothing at all going on until we presented something to him or tried to teach him a word, teach in air quotes, because it was already there. I just could not remember a time in my life, whether I was a small child or whether I was an adult, where I was just sitting, whether it was in a meeting or in a class like yours when I was supposed to be focused, and there weren't a thousand things running back and forth through my mind. And so that led me to want to try to research, and that's what we're going to be presenting on at ASHA coming up at this centennial. Some of my findings from that in my journey
All
to
right.
try and demonstrate
That would be great.
that my son more going on than what people could observe on the outside. And the ABA that we were in at the that's what we were focused on. I was being trained to look at what I could see my son doing, but the difficulty is for languaging, it only becomes, I guess, visible to me or expressed to me when he uses some type of outward modality. That is kind of like the input. No, what I wanted to bring up was just ever since I learned about Richard Feynman and some of the things that I learned about him when I was taking a physics class, which now is an ASHA requirement, and so that's why I was in that class. I hadn't taken physics since high school, and it struck me when I would read different quotes or different interviews from him how he would use that. He was trying to explain quantum matters, and it was clear to him, but he would sometimes make statements like um, it was challenging or he didn't know how to express it in a way that the person he was talking to would understand.
Yeah.
And it gets right back to what we were saying is that it was crystal clear right here to him,
Yeah.
quantum, whatever he wanted to talk
Exactly.
about, but
Right.
for
Yeah.
him to
Right.
get it out to that interviewer
But
to understand.
by the way, that's true at every level. So that a Feynman headset, yeah, he's thinking quantum stuff. But my kid, the video I was going to show, Bal may edit it in, is uh, he was making a shark into a plastic shark into a spy. He was dressing it or something like that. It's talking about that. And in another case, he was singing about Blues Clues. You're doing a Blues Clues routine and stuff. And in another case, he was pretending to wash dishes by spitting on them and going like this. I'll try to show that. But the point is that at that level, that's what he's, expressing. And it's when he's dressing and doing all that stuff, that's a challenge because he's just discovering all this stuff, and it's a 2-year-old's headset. In cases of neurodiversity, others may have other ways of doing this. And, we have to try to discover that, but presume that everybody is languaging, that is, at least internally, ha responding to this world and having their own headset about about things, and everyone has intentionality. Everybody, meaning intentionality refers to one's goals. So everyone at all times has trying to accomplish something, whether it's doing something or avoiding something. You get your, you have your intentionality. I believe ideation is universal, and coming up with some way to express it internally to oneself, that just happens and that's universal. And that most people, not everybody necessarily, may want to express that themselves outward.
But
Uh,
I was going to say confronting it, certainly explaining it.
well,
Maybe that's something for the generations, because that's why we need to have the conversation to
yeah,
try and determine why it is that something that little kids can do that's so complex, if we're not biologically somehow inclined to do it,
right.
how is it
Yeah,
that
it's a
they're able
miracle.
to pull that off?
It's a
And
now miracle.
if you look at the contrast between habilitation and rehabilitation, and you think about, say, the stroke patient who they never had to give a second thought to speaking. Yes, they stumbled like
Yeah.
many of us do. But once it goes completely away and they're trying to relearn it, whether part motor, part aphasic, just the sheer difficulty that they're met with leads to such frustration for something that was seemingly child's play to them initially because they were doing it since they could remember. And so that begs the question that something biologic happened and changed during that medical event. Where do we go from here? It doesn't mean that we can explain it, but we should talk about it.
Plus, they're still intentional. I don't care what happened. They're still
Mhm.
trying to do something. They still have stuff going on in their head. And they typically, there's a book out called Incompetence, in parentheses, Competence, Judy Duchenne and some others on that. Duchenne is the speech person. There's a PT, but OTs all in that book. And their whole point is that there's a chapter on aphasia, and the point she makes is that when that person who's now being has this happening gets upset and expresses it, and maybe uses whatever language they have left, whatever words that they can get their hands on, or any behaviors, like an F word or something like that. I'm not going to say it here right now. They're called emotion. They get called a name. They get called emotionally labile, or
Yeah.
or
Mhm. Yeah.
disruptive,
Mhm.
non-compliant, and all those things. When that's the actual, real languaging, that's the real thing.
That's real
But
language.
and then they go into a speech lesson, and they're being asked to retrieve a series of words in an exercise, and they don't want to do it, or they're resisting it, or they're having trouble with it. That's that's so what they did is real languaging and communication gets labeled incompetent and troublemaking and troublesome, etc. And then the only thing that's considered real is the exercise. So then
Yeah.
they're they're often attacked. They're criticized for not being able to remember a sequence of words that are just not has nothing to do with what's on their minds at the particular moment. And what's on their mind gets attacked as well, so that they're in really bad shape. They're really being, it's not right.
No, what's on their mind is labeled as inappropriate.
Inappropriate, yeah.
It's charted as inappropriate, and really, that's what needs to be probed further.
Yeah, and
That's
it's
what needs to be probed further.
and respected. It recognizes competence. It is absolutely competent. If I'm able to have this conversation with you now, and I have a stroke next week, and whatever, and I can't do it, but in my mind I'm trying to get this back and blah blah blah, and I say F. I've told students, you're treating me, you let me say my all my obscenities and everything, because it's that's what I have every right to say that stuff. That's you know you know what I'm saying, and that's how I'm feeling, and that is real. That's all I can say.
It's your human right, isn't
My
it?
everything, yeah, the human,
It's your human
yeah,
right to
yeah,
have that communication.
human right. That is
Yeah.
correct.